For joining us. So thank you for joining us for the final webinar in this series for Churches Count on Nature. And this one is, as you know, on the subject of accessibility in churchyards in the widest sense. So the webinar will consist of short presentations from 3 speakers who have a range of experience in the subject and will be chaired by Reverend Canon Dr. David Primrose, he of the Adder sighting. He's formerly of Lichfield Diocese and is Vice Chair of Caring for God's Acre. And after the presentations, he'll be leading a panel discussion, and there will then be time at the end for questions. The webinar series for Churches Count on Nature is sponsored by the Church of England, but everyone is welcome, whether you belong to a church, any church, or to no church. Everybody is muted, apart from the speakers, which improves the quality of the sound for everybody. So if you have a question, do please put it in the chat. And there, as I mentioned, there'll be a Q&A session at the end, and I will pass those questions to David so that he can direct them in the most appropriate way. The webinar will be recorded, as have all the webinars this week. And everyone who's registered will receive a link to the recording. And that link will be live until the end of June. And the webinar will also go up in due course onto the Church of England website, onto the Church of England website. And as I mentioned, this is the last in a series of 5 webinars this week. All of them will be listed on a slide at the end of the whole webinar. Or the list is still visible on the Caring for God's Acre website. If you missed any, do contact us on inquiries@cfga.org.uk and we can send you a link. And my colleague Liam will be putting on the link to the page on the CFGA website, and also that inquiries at email address right at the end. So it'll be there for everybody to look at and to make notes of. So I'll pass you over now to David Primrose.
Welcome. Thank you very, very much, Prue. Thanks for everyone for joining, and many thanks to all those who are going to be joining the webinar later. I know many people this week have been registering for webinars and finding time later on to enjoy them. So thank you very much, whether it's now or in time to come. Very, very excited about this particular topic. Since time of being a vicar all the way through, I've known the importance of churchyards for the wider community as a place to access, engage with nature and creation. And I've also been deeply concerned about making sure that all that we do is accessible to everybody, whatever particular challenges they might be facing. So I'm delighted that you've joined, because you clearly also share that passion for churchyards, that passion for accessibility. And I'm particularly glad that we've got Helen and Jeanette and Claire with us, each of whom are going to make a particular contribution that's going to set the scene for the questions you have and the experience you wish to share. We're going to begin with Helen James. She's project manager for our disability project in the Church of England, and has got that commitment to promote accessibility in all its different aspects. And she's going to start by giving us her perspective on both her work and its impact on churchyards. Helen, over to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, David, for your introduction. So, as David has said, I look after the Disability Project, a set of funded initiatives within the Church of England with respect to improving our accessibility and inclusion for disabled people across the wider church. So I'm really interested to talk about this accessibility with respect to churchyards and church grounds. Very important. And I subtitle my short presentation, Spaces of Wellbeing for All, for reasons which I'll now go into a little bit. Thank you, Liam. Next slide. So this image that we see before us, the 5 ways of well-being, was developed by the NHS, and it's had quite a wide usage among many organisations. So you may have seen it or know these 5 points from your own experience. So I want to talk about how these relate to our churchyards and potential use of our churchyards. So when we think about connect, how do our churchyards help people connect with each other? Well, in my experience, I'm thinking of gardening groups that might be started with, with our church grounds in mind, or a green gym, which is an older person's church maintenance group, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So there are opportunities for people to connect with each other through the use of our churchyards. What about being active? Activity. There are so many different ways that people can be active within our churchyards, very simply walking their dogs, or churchyard maintenance, weeding and digging up nettles, for example. That's my sort of experience of people being active in and around our churchyards. Take notice, it says here. So many times I've seen people simply sitting in the churchyards. I've done that myself, enjoying whatever the weather is throwing at us, relaxing, looking at the natural history around us, and taking a moment for prayer if one is a person of faith. Learning. How do churchyards help us learn? Well, I've taken a group of school kids around a churchyard and pointed out natural history. Other people might be interested in planting flowers and learning those names. And in this series, in this webinar series, I hear that you've been learning about lizards and dragons and amphibians. So lots of learning that can happen within churchyards. And what about giving to others? Well, often our churchyards host war graves, and by maintaining those war graves, we are giving back to those people and the families and the descendants of those people who have given to us. So that's just one example of how our churchyards activity in our churchyards can give back to our community. Next slide, please, Liam. So when we think about our churchyards being a perfect space for promoting well-being for ourselves, for our community, for our neighbours, what about access for all? Is that possible? So I've got here 2 examples of how this has been made possible. So firstly, on the left-hand side here, we've got the example of St Peter's, Aylesbury, and they've created a gardening group for their church grounds, and that has helped them build connections to the local community. And they've been sure to build those connections to enable access by the local community. And this access is intentional for all and to take account of the different needs that different people might bring. For example, their gardening group includes a couple where the gentleman in the couple suffers from Alzheimer's. And his lady wife is normally his carer, and she can take a little break while he's involved in the gardening group, and he can be fully engaged with that group. They also have connection with the local primary school, which is a special ed school, and they invite a group of wheelchair users to come to their space and to access the space as kind of co-participants with the activities there. So they've been really intentional about creating level pathways with surfaces suitable for wheelchairs and step-free access to all the areas for the public. They've even gone to the trouble of creating a space in the hedgerow, so breaking up the hedgerow so that an entrance to the church grounds could be possible there, where the other entrance would have involved steps. So they've, been really thoughtful about how this has been designed. And Dave, their leader, who I see has joined us here, so thank you for joining us, Dave. It's lovely to have you. Dave says to me, "We are a small project in a deprived community. We have developed an accessible crossing space between church and community, where supportive relationships are built, where anyone can encounter God in a natural setting." And I think that's such a key phrase. an accessible crossing place between church and community. And that's what our churchyards can represent. Over here on the left, on the right, I beg your pardon, the other left, I've got an example of the Green Gym at Portslade, and this is sort of my experience, my own church. And the Green Gym is an older person's group that helps with churchyard maintenance. And the group leader directs operations, helps them limber up at the start, make sure that everyone is safe when they're using the tools, and that everyone can operate safely within the limits of their access needs. Now, it's true we don't have wheelchair users within this group, but we have a wide range of access needs relating to their age and their different health conditions. And it's important that we recognise that disability and access requirements aren't limited to wheelchair use, although wheelchair use is a very important thing to take account of. There are a wide range of other access needs that we need to bear in mind, as do this group, the Green Gym. So I applaud both of those groups. Thank you, Liam. Yeah. So thinking in wider terms about access in practice, there's a whole range of different groups of people who may come to our churchyards. I've mentioned pupils from the local primary school. I've mentioned people walking dogs, people resting, just people visiting their grave markers, their family grave markers, war graves. If you're very lucky, you may have a group from the probation service contributing to your churchyard maintenance, doing their community service. But it's vital to understand that all of these groups may include disabled people, people with limited mobility, people with different access needs. How can we enable them to access, to benefit from our churchyard spaces, to promote their well-being on an equal basis with everyone? Thank you. Next slide. So that's a question. How do we do it? And one thing which is recommended is to conduct an informal audit. And this is basically simply a learning walk. We recommend that the person undertaking this learning walk starts at the place where you expect a person to arrive at your church. And that might mean the car park, it might mean an entrance point from the local walkway, from the pavement. It might be a nearby bus stop. And you would need to then progress around the churchyard from that arrival point through all the areas that an able-bodied person would be able to access and would participate in activities. And throughout this walk or roll, if you're doing it in a wheelchair, you're thinking to yourself, what barriers are there for a disabled person? So, for example, in the car park, is there a designated disabled parking bay, which is marked out? Is the surface appropriate, or are they potholes which could act as trip hazards? When we come into the churchyard, looking at the pathways, do they have an appropriate surface? Jeanette's going to talk a little bit more about surface, but one of the highlights is that gravel is very difficult for wheeled vehicles. If you're using flagstones on your pathways, they can become slippery depending what the weather is. So that would need maintenance. That's something to bear in mind. Thinking about the pathways again, we need to think about the slopes. Are the slopes very steep, or are they gentle enough for a wheelchair user to manage? And if you're not sure, then you might need to find a wheelchair user and ask them to try out the slope and to advise you. If it is a very steep slope, then you might be thinking to yourself, could we find a different pathway? Could we create a slightly longer, more gentle pathway from A to B? If you do have steps within your church grounds, as in the bottom picture here, then it might be worth thinking about, could we put handrails there so that those who are ambulant and can manage steps but need a bit more security to prevent trips and falls, they can feel secure and supported? I've put seating arrangements. Some people, their access need is relating to fatigue and pain, and they need spaces to rest comfortably. Often it's very helpful to have seating with armrests so that people can easily arise. They can use that to support themselves as they rise from seating. And then I've finally put toilet arrangements. Obviously, the perfect solution would be an indoor plumb toilet accessible to all. However, that's not always possible. And in some circumstances, it's feasible to put an outdoor composting toilet in your churchyard area. A really big topic, and I'm not going to go into it in depth here, but it is a possibility. Obviously, if you wanted to pursue that route, you'd need to research it carefully and talk to your DAC. You'd probably need a faculty for that. Thank you, Liam. So, having done your learning walk, your next step, which I haven't really mentioned in the slide because I know that Jeanette's going to cover this in detail, is to consult with others with lived experience. So as perhaps an able-bodied person doing your learning walk, you might think, oh, we need this, but you need then to double check that with others and to find out the things which you didn't spot from your walk. I'll leave Jeanette to talk more about that. As you then think about the works which are required, then you might want to think about what grant funding is available. At the Disability Project, we have a range, we have 2 different grant streams. So there are some large grants of 50,000 for structural works often. There's not very many of those, so they're not widely available. You may not have a chance to apply for those. But smaller grants are also available of up to 5,000. And so that could be an option for your parish to apply for if your parish is in the north of England, in the province of York. There's more information on the Disability Project webpage here. The National Church also has a programme called Net Zero Carbon, and in some scenarios, work within a churchyard might qualify under their criterion. I don't speak for them, but that might be something worth investigating. And there's always the National Lottery, who are often quite fond of granting funding for community-minded projects. Liam, next slide, please. So, in a summary, as you think about enabling access for all within your churchyards, to promote people's well-being, to get that accessible crossing space between church and community, how would you go about it? I suggest taking a tour, noting what might be changed to make it accessible, consulting with people with lived experience, making a plan, recognising that not everything can be done tomorrow. Perhaps there's a quick win, and perhaps there's something that can be built up to, and funding applied for, and so on. So a long-term plan, a short-term plan. Perhaps you're not the church leader, perhaps you're someone who would like to champion this idea in consultation with the church leadership. I've put there a link to St Andrew's Church in Otterington, an example of where a small grant made a big difference, levelled out their pathway, eliminated a small step, and contributed to a really good experience for a wheelchair user at their wedding in April. And there's more information about everything I've spoken of today at our web pages at Barrier Free Belonging. Thank you for listening.
Helen, thank you so much indeed for giving that wonderful overview. And you did quite a few times then temptingly saying, and Jeanette's going to be saying more about this. So I don't want to take any time away from Jeanette. Tell us more about churchyards and particularly paths and how we can do better. Jeanette, we can't hear you yet. Jeanette, we can't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Yes, okay. So what I want to highlight most of all is this slogan that was adopted by disabled people, to highlight the need to include disabled people when planning any new project or service. So it's nothing about us without us. So I wouldn't even bother if you're able-bodied, doing a tour on your own. That's not going to work. Get all the people locally with lived experience, because the other thing that is challenging is the fact that what suits one person with their needs may not necessarily suit another. So let's look at the next slide. So it is about all disabled people being involved in the development of all aspects of accessibility. Next slide. And here we have a classic example of the gravel path that Helen has mentioned. And it was this initially used to be a grass path, which is equally inaccessible. But the people who are involved in setting up the new path, it wasn't that they were trying to deliberately exclude. They were looking for something that was going to be suitable for wet weather, that was going to be cost effective. And then they just put in something that they thought would improve access, but wasn't. And it resulted in a situation where access was denied to quite a large number of people. And on the next slide, which we're going to look at in a minute, I just want you to be aware, I want to show you a video of two people coming up the path. And I want you to notice how the lady in the blue top is trying to access the churchyard with her relator. She's got so far, but the relator's just not working over the gravel. So she's had to pick the relator up, take a few steps, and then put it back down again so she can have a rest before trying to tackle the next bit. And then you'll see her trying to move the relator over the gravel. But if you watch the wheels on her relator, you can see it moving sideways in a jittery manner and really not making much progress. So, Liam, can we look at the first video, please? Now, I stopped the video at this point because I thought that actually she'd given up trying to move any further up. But actually, she was very determined to get further up the path. She's one of the ladies who likes to walk her dog. And so there's another short video showing her determination to reach the bench where she's going to rest. So the next video, please. And you can see how she can only take a few steps and she's having to pick up her relator to try and move forwards. She does make it to the bench. Thank you, Liam. Next slide. And here we've got the churchyard and where the parking space was designated for disabled people. And again, as Helen mentioned, you need to have an actually marked out space with space either side for the disabled person to exit the car, and it needs to be a firm gravel surface. And again, people who put up the sign just weren't aware of these needs. They thought the disabled sign was good enough. And I'm just going to show another image. If you could just do the next image on that slide. There you can see the side a little bit more visible from one angle, but from certain angles, the flowers in the churchyard have grown, well, they're more weeds actually, have grown up and obscured it, so that it was difficult to see from certain angles where this space was going to be. Now, actually, I should just mention, I'm aware that certain people here from overseas, and it may be your regulations regarding disabled parking spaces are different. So absolutely include people with a range of disability in your planning team. Now, there are a large number of recommendations as to how you can make your churchyard accessible. And I would suggest you go to the sensorytrust.org website for all the guidelines, because there's far too many to include. And again, there's recommendations on the ramp. Again, one wheelchair user may be able to manage a slightly steeper slope than others. So there are definite regulations on what the baseline is for that. and it needs to be a ramp that's wide enough, because not all wheelchairs come in the same size. Some wheelchairs have the back wheels further apart, because there may be an above the amputee, so that when the centre of gravity is different. And I think the other thing which I want to stress most of all, do not accept a lack of funding as a reason that access cannot be achieved. There's a lot of funding spent on able-bodied people, and there surely should be funding put to one side for disabled. And the other thing that I've also recently told is, oh, we didn't have time to consider the needs of the disabled. And I'm sorry, that's not an acceptable reason for not pursuing accessible churchyards. Next slide. Now, one of the things I think we also need to appreciate is how access for people with disabilities has actually improved access for everybody. And making these spaces and facilities accessible also makes them accessible for people like families with buggies, skateboarders, bicycle riders. This environment will benefit everybody, just as in your everyday life. Adaptations and gadgets that were started for the disabled population are now in everyday use. The TV remote control is one example. Smart devices, voice recognition, things like that. Although I would have to say, not the automatic doors that open, because if you're in a wheelchair, you often don't register as being there. So those doors and revolving doors are a nightmare. So those are not good ideas that help the disabled people. Next slide. So it's just to reiterate that people with disabilities have the same rights as everybody else, and a right to fully participate in community life. And it's not just unfair, it's wasting human resources, and it's making society poorer. And this goes, you know, and particularly I'm thinking here also of the invisible disabilities, so which Claire will be talking about next. And on my last slide, there we go. This is going back to the Sensory Trust. It's more than ramps and toilets. That's the first thing everybody thinks of. It's about having amenities that can be used emotionally and they're socially accessible as well. Next slide. And here I've got some examples of where access has been achieved. So here we are, it's a rural church. So please, rural churches, you can do this. And here you've got space for the, unfortunately there was a car park, so I couldn't show you the disabled car parking space. It's a tarmac, it's a smooth access. If you needed to get the car right up to the church door, they actually have a possibility of doing that. Next slide. And here they've got the tarmac going up, and you've got a bench people can sit. Next slide. And Helen mentioned surfaces. Wet surfaces are actually very dangerous for anyone with poor mobility. And this, I've actually photographed it in the rain, so you can see how it's a non-slip surface that you've got here. Then this is one of these purpose-built paths. Next slide. This wasn't actually in a churchyard, but just imagine there's a church just out of shot. Because the other thing that hasn't been mentioned is that if you've got a long path, you need passing spaces, because if you've got one wheelchair coming in one direction and another in the opposite direction, they need to get by. And we have these on our small rural roads, so passing spots have to be included as well. Next slide. And just to reiterate here that the church community is only complete when all are welcome, all ages, all abilities, all disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed, Jeanette, for just taking us into some very practical and robust advice there. Claire's got a real passion for churchyards. I'm sure that will come across, and her desire is for that passion for churchyards to be shared with people, many of them with perhaps invisible disabilities. Claire, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you to Helen and Jeanette for just showing how amazing our churchyards are and how they should entirely be completely accessible for everyone, you know, whatever your ability. So, and I'm going to continue with that theme today, as you can tell. So we've spent some time looking at physical disabilities and how to make churchyards more accessible in terms of those. But as we all know, and as David has just said, not all disabilities are visible. So now I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking at the challenges that neurodivergent visitors might find in visiting our churches and our churchyards, particularly our churchyards for the purpose of this talk, and also consider how we might be able to respond to that. Now, I must highlight that I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert in brain science and things like that, but I have been working with PCCs on church and churchyard projects for the last 17 years, so I've got a bit of experience there. But mainly for the last 10 years, I think I've gained a lot of insight and experience because we've been navigating through life with a severely dyslexic and also autistic child, and it's absolutely brilliant. I see the world in a whole new way now, and it's absolutely wonderful. But there is an extra layer of thought that we had to put into things. If we're visiting somewhere, we're visiting places, or we're doing new activities that he's not done before, there's an extra level of thought that I have to go through and think, oh, what do I need to consider? What do I need to pack? What do I need to take with me? How do I need to prepare him for that visit? And it's almost done as a second nature thing now. It's almost kind of ingrained in me now. So hopefully, because of that experience, I can kind of share a little bit of that with you today. Next slide, please, Liam. So first of all, I thought it's really important that we make sure we understand the language that we're using today. All these three terms are often thrown around quite a lot, and often in the wrong context. So neurodiversity basically refers to the fact that our brains work differently, and where you sit on that cognitive spectrum is entirely specific to you. So the neurodiversity element covers all of the ways our brains work. Neurotypical refers to people who think and act in ways that are similar to most other people. And neurodivergent is where people think, behave, process, and interpret information in ways that are different to most other people. And I've listed here the most common neurodivergent conditions. I'm not going to go through them all now in detail because I haven't got enough time, and also there's so many nuances in them I really wouldn't be able to do them justice. But you can look up those in more detail afterwards if you like to. I will refer to some of them as we go through though. And there's so many brilliant positives. I mean, I don't want you to think that, you know, there's so many brilliant positives that come with these conditions. And but ultimately, lots of the places that we work in and that we visit are generally set up with neurotypical needs in mind. And it can be really tough for some neurodivergent visitors to be able to navigate through that. Next slide, please. And now I'm just going to cover some of the barriers to access that people with neurodivergent conditions might experience that may be relevant to our churchyards. There's physical challenges, and Helen and Jeanette have been absolutely brilliant in outlining these. Things like steps and uneven paths and difficult terrain are, of course, challenging for people with mobility issues. And if you're dyspraxic, you will probably have those sorts of mobility issues as well. So considering that physical access is really, really important. If you have autism or ADHD, you might have sensory challenges, and this could include things like bright lighting, or there might be an issue with significant contrast between lighting. So very light places right next to very dark places can cause visual stress sometimes. Noisy spaces, crowded spaces, visually busy spaces can be quite overwhelming for many neurodivergent people. And things like strong smells even can cause some upset. One of the really sad parts about that some neurodivergent people might face is social isolation, and this is something where I think churches and church projects could be so beneficial. Because some might find it difficult to connect socially. They may face stigma and discrimination because they're different. They may face or may experience negative attitudes and sometimes even bullying. And they may experience misunderstandings simply because of differences in approaches to communication. They might miss social cues, or they might interpret things literally, and it doesn't translate to people who are neurotypical, who think of and process that communication in a different way. So feeling isolated and feeling different can be a real concern for people who are neurodivergent, and a very real issue. And also there's a big difficulty with change and visiting new environments or undertaking new activities can be particularly stressful. You know, if you're autistic or perhaps ADHD, this might be something you struggle with. My son Owen has this quite significantly. So if he has a normal timetable at school and he's absolutely fine with that, he's absolutely fine with his everyday timetable. But if there's something that's happening at school, which means the timetable is being changed, if they're having a day of activities or doing some fun activities in the afternoon, he'll enjoy the activities, but he will get really, really stressed because he doesn't know what's going to happen next, and the normal routine is being thrown out of whack. And his teachers know to step in and give him additional support in those scenarios. But despite these challenges, churchyards are so ideally placed to respond to the needs of neurodivergent people. And Jeanette and Helen have outlined that already for your well-being. And they're just brilliant to connect with communities in really, really lovely and wonderful ways. We had that lovely chart at the very beginning that Helen showed about all the different ways that churchyards can be used to connect and sort of help and improve people's mental health and well-being. And it's part of our gospel of welcome to do that as Christians and as stewards of these public wonderful sites. It's part of our gospel to be able to do that and include all people in our churchyards. They're quiet and calm and reflective spaces that are away from the busyness of daily life, and they offer a really gentle sensory experience. They also offer a really unique opportunity for mission and community and outreach, which I'll talk a little bit about right at the very end of the project that we've got going on in Coventry Diocese. And they're a place where everyone can feel safe and valued and connected on their own terms, not just in neurotypical terms. So they can be a real haven of safety and security for neurodivergent people. Thank you, Liam. So where do we start with that? Notwithstanding that churchyards are already quite good at being, suitable and thoughtful for neurodivergent people, there's still obviously more that we can do. And the starting point is always listening. And I think Jeanette talked about this, absolutely brilliant. Talk to people who are neurodivergent. And this ensures that any access audit that you do, any sort of work that you do going forward is grounded in lived experience, not just on your own assumptions of what the people in your community who are neurodivergent might need. Neurodivergent people are the experts in their own needs. So it's really important that you value their voices just as much as you value their presence. So talk to them, it's so important. And once you've had a really good chat with people who suffer from some of these conditions, you might want to undertake an access audit, which again, we've referred to a little bit earlier. Now, an access audit is, historically and traditionally, it's very much focused on physical access, so on mobility, on visual and auditory considerations, but there is some overlap here. So obviously, mobility issues will be, the considerations for those who have mobility issues will be of benefit for those who are dyspraxic. When you're considering your lighting levels and your sound levels, and this is in your church building more so than in your churchyard, that will take into consideration people who have sensory needs on that score. So there is some overlap, but often this overlap is only addressed incidentally or as a byproduct or as a secondary benefit to these physical access improvements. So I would argue that neurodivergent inclusion and access deserve a more intentional and dedicated focus and should be a core part of how we think about our welcome. So you do your access audit, and I've given a link here to something called A Place to Belong, which is a brilliant example of it's got some useful information on it that can help you think about how you consider your space, and it includes mental health and neurodivergent considerations as well as physical disabilities too. So it's absolutely fantastic for that. I have also included the front cover. If you want more information on access generally, then this work by the church that's been produced by the Church of England, Equal Access to Church Buildings, gives a lot of information on that as well. So once you've done your access audit, again, test it and go back to some consultation and ask people who are neurodivergent to input into this access audit that you've created and that you've developed, because it's, communication and understanding is key in all of this. Thank you, Liam. So once those insights have been gathered through that consultation and that access audit that you might do, that walking around and considering how you can meet those needs, you need to translate that into practical changes. I can't be too prescriptive here. I'm only going to give you some examples. There's this very common phrase that is, if you're a carer of an autistic child, there's a very common phrase that says, once you've met one autistic child, you've met one autistic child, that's it. It's so diverse, there's so many different challenges and different needs that it's not a one fit solution. So just be aware of that when you're going through this. One thing you could do, for example, is develop your information on your website or on your social media that can provide more information about your site to help prepare people before they visit. So if your churchyard is being used for events or for gatherings, or is even just open to the public, consider producing some information in advance to help neurodivergent people prepare. Jodwell Bank in Cheshire have produced an absolutely brilliant familiarisation guide, and this is a guide that basically explains everything you could possibly need to know or encounter at Jodwell Bank. It's brilliant. It's the route through the site, it's how you get from the car park to the buildings, it's what you will see and wear, it describes what this uniform the staff will be wearing, it talks about where the refreshments areas are, where the quiet spaces are, how the ticketing system works, where you can put your coats if you want to put your coat. It's got absolutely everything. And they've put that on their website so that if you are if you struggle with change, or if you find visiting new environments causes you a lot of anxiety, you can look all that stuff up beforehand, and you can start to prepare yourself and familiarise yourself with the site before you go there. Now, obviously, as a churchyard, you won't necessarily need to do something quite as expansive as that, but it can be really simple. You can just explain, we ring the bells, and the bells will ring at such and such a time, or on the hour, or however often you ring your bells. You could highlight where the busy areas of your churchyard are, and that could be the main path to the churchyard door, where you might get people coming and going quite regularly. You could outline the things that people might encounter on their visit there. So it might be people mowing the churchyard, although hopefully not too much, or people visiting graves, or one really useful thing is just to highlight whether there's whether people need to stick to the paths, or whether you could roam free if you want to. These sorts of things really help to reduce anxiety in people who find that kind of change difficult and hard. Sensory friendly pathways are really important. And again, we've talked about this a little bit already. So ensuring your paths are clearly defined and that they're well maintained and free from unexpected textures and obstacles that can be really distressing for people with sensory sensitivities is really important as well. Lighting and shade, this is more difficult to control in a churchyard. I appreciate that, but ensuring there are shaded areas that have a kind of consistent level of light in them is really useful for people who might suffer from sensory distress if there's too much contrast between light and dark. So thinking about incorporating a seating area in an environment like that would be really, really, really good. And clear signage, this is something that that's my bugbear really. If you have signage in your churchyard, if you're putting up a nature trail or doing anything in your churchyard, please, please, please use simple, consistent and visual signage to help with that. The British Dyslexia Association has got a comprehensive dyslexia-friendly style guide, which includes details of suitable fonts and justification and spacing, and what kind of colours to use, and how to avoid, avoid the pitfalls that might cause distress for people who have processing difficulties with literature. I've just put a picture of a sign here. This is a little trail that we did over Easter with my son. It was a lovely trail, but the signage was appalling. This is quite a visually stressful sign anyway. There's a lot going on in it for a start. But then you move to the text itself, and it's centrally justified. It's all over. It's a bit sort of wonky and bumpy, and there's random capital letters dispersed through the text there. And I took my son around on this trail, and he got, after 3 of these, he got about 15 of these overall, and after 3 of these, he was getting quite stressed because he was finding it really difficult to read. And then on top of that, there were other children coming to do the trail and reading it far more younger than him and reading it far more quickly. And this just made him feel worse. It just made him feel like, why can't I do that? And he just stopped engaging with it at that point. And it was really sad because it was a really fun trail and it could have been made so much easier just by incorporating better signage. As with all works to churches, there might be some permissions that are required to make changes to your churchyard, so faculties or List B permissions, or possibly even planning permissions. So again, before you make any changes to your churchyard, do speak to your local church buildings team before you make any changes, because they'll be best placed to advise what you might need to do. Next slide, please. So this is the last thing I just wanted to mention. I've talked a bit about the mission and outreach opportunities that churchyards can offer, particularly for those with neurodivergent issues. And we think this is so important that we've made it a really significant part of a major project that we've got about to kick off in Coventry Diocese, and I'm so excited about it. So in partnership with the wonderful Caring for God's Acre and also Warwickshire Wildlife Trust, the Heritage Fund from the National Lottery have given us a development grant to work up a major project which focuses on recording and protecting and enhancing the biodiversity within our churchyard. And it's aiming to transform those churchyards all across Coventry and Warwickshire into thriving spaces for biodiversity, for heritage and for community well-being. And a significant part of this is community engagement. We want to get everyone involved. We want to get the whole community involved in this project, and we'll be doing that through recording species and through developing and managing habitats and through working in groups to ensure these spaces are brilliant for all the bugs and mammals and plants that make them so special. And what's particularly amazing for me and for my family and for families like mine is that it explicitly recognises and will be working with making sure churchyards are welcoming for neurodivergent individuals, and it's a really key part of our project. So we will be consulting with neurodivergent people, we'll be working with specialists and organisations that support them as to how we can do things like creating sensory friendly environments and developing activities and learning opportunities for neurodivergent and children and children with other special educational needs, and to encourage this inclusive participation using things like accessible signage and you know, sensory friendly activities and experiences. So there's going to be a lot of this coming up in the next 12 months. I'd love to talk to you all about it again when it all keeps going. So I'll try and keep you posted, but I think there'll be lots of learning opportunities and just such joyful stories that will come out of that project. So I'm really excited about that. And then just finally, I've put a few links up if you'd like to find some more information. If you do nothing else, have a look at the Inside Our Minds series by Chris Packham. It's on iPlayer. He did a show on autism a few years ago, and he's followed that up with one on ADHD and one on dyslexia. So if you do nothing else, those shows are really insightful in learning about how neurodivergent minds work and the challenges that they face as they try and navigate through the world. But thank you very much. Sorry, I think I might have gone on a bit. I'm sorry. I get too passionate about it.
Claire, you definitely are passionate. Thank you very much indeed. And it's something about which we really do want to be passionate. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Jeanette, for your background and for Helen setting the scene. An opportunity for us now to pick up on questions and comments. I'm sure that many of those who are actually listening in have got their own lived experience or questions to ask. And so please do put those in chat. And then Prue's going to be reading them out. I think, Prue, you're going to begin with David's question about alternatives to tarmac, and Jeanette, you'd be the right person to answer that.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My actual preferred surface is hogging, which is a combination of sand, gravel, and other products, which is what the National Trust properties use on the majority of their sites. But I think that would be my preferred choice and it's not expensive. I think that's the other thing that's important to point out. You can use self-binding gravel. You can put down webs and put the gravel in it. They're good, but they're not as good as hogging. So that would be my preference. Hogging is not suitable, however, for disabled car parking spaces because of the weight of the cars going on. that it is appropriate. I mean, there are others, but I'm talking about bricks, epoxy resin, and I don't think they're quite so eco-friendly as the hoggin is.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that, Jeanette. Just to recap there, this was David Oglethorpe asking whether there were some accessible but not fossil fuel-based alternatives to tarmac. So thank you, Jeanette, for talking about hoggin there, which isn't something I'd ever heard of. And Nigel, I'm sorry, there we are, Nigel Baldero, thank you, has a plastic reinforcing frame which allows grass to be go through, but is graded and solid enough for wheelchairs. I don't know if Helen, maybe you have any experience of that, or if anyone has any experience of that as another alternative.
I don't have personal experience of that method. We just need to make sure that wheelchair users have been consulted and are able to demonstrate that that's suitable for them. Perhaps Jeanette can contribute.
Yeah, again, it's about how much the grass grows through. I can appreciate that putting the webbing down on grass is a much cheaper option, and it's certainly very good for everyone's cars in a car parking area. But there are other old surfaces that I would prefer to use instead of that. And again, if it's about cost, we spend so much on the able-bodied. We really have to put some budget to one side for people who are disabled. So I would ask people to really look at their priorities for funding if it's a problem of cost.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeanette. Prue, where else are you going to lead our thoughts?
What else have I got here? I've got a comment from Rosalind in St Peter's in Aylesbury. Following up, I know that I think it was Dave who had put in the comment before, and she's saying that at St Peter's in Aylesbury, we promote health and well-being in so many ways. We have children who come along to grow outdoors, who are neurodivergent, and support the children and the parents. And this was obviously a group that you were very well aware of, wasn't it, Helen?
Yes, I had a wonderful conversation with Dave Furs, who's present here, and learned all about the many different activities that they run through in their church grounds, you know, connecting with a wide range of people in their local community, and often operating their churchyard activities or the church grounds activities on the same day as there's an internal activity within their church itself, such as I think they've got a food bank, they've got a cafe, and so the couple that I mentioned with the gentleman with Alzheimer's, he would be working in the gardening group, fully accessing that sort of more kind of like physical activity in collaboration with that friendship group, while his wife was then indoors and she was serving at the cafe and connecting with other people there. So St Peter's in Aylesbury, a really good example of how to use the outdoor spaces and the indoor spaces in a really collaborative and thoughtful way to provide access to the widest range of people.
Thank you. And I spotted, Helen, that you had, I'm sorry, I've got it up here, that you'd put the link in the chat to the Church of England advice and guidance on church buildings, specifically accessibility. So
absolutely. So Claire mentioned a brilliant document called Equal Access for All, co-authored by Bill Brabner, Archdeacon of Halifax, and that is referenced on that page. So please do look at that page. It's got a wide range of information, including some of the legal guidance about the Equality Act, if that's the right word, and it's also got a direct link to Equal Access for All.
I think we'll just look to yourself, Jeanette, for picking up Charlotte's comment. She's asking for advice. She says, our church stands in a steeply sloping churchyard with no obvious way to create access paths with gentler gradients, partly because of gravestones. Who could we get to help us find a way to solve this conundrum?
Right. Well, it is possible to get permission to move gravestones. We've got a church near to where I live, and they've actually got a winding path that's cut through the churchyard, and they had to get permission to do that. Sometimes there is difficulty, and there is possible to get, you can have outdoor lifts for certain situations, obviously very expensive. I would suggest you get your DAC or to come along and have a look at it and see what other alternatives there are. I mean, it might be possible if your church, the churchyard goes, the path goes up to the church. It may be that the church then has steps down into the church, in which case you could lower the whole path to eliminate some of the slope. But I think you're going to need somebody to come and have a look, and with that sort of experience, to see what the alternatives are.
Getting lots of nods there, Jeanette, from Claire saying check with the DAC, and Helen also. Helen.
I would say I wouldn't advise installing a lift in the outdoor spaces. Lifts are difficult enough to maintain over the long term when they're indoors, and outdoors obviously you've got that much more weathering going on, so you really need to find an alternative that works without installing an electrical device if that's possible. And I will echo Jeanette's comment about please talk to your church buildings team, and they'll be able to advise on what they can do with respect to the gravestones.
Just to change tack slightly, Claire, and draw you in, Alison Marsh is dyslexic, and she likes the idea of creating a project called In My Shoes to make people have a better understanding. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Oh, I saw that message come in, and I would like to know more about it as well. And perhaps, Anderson, we can connect at some point. And as part of our biodiversity project, it would be really good to talk to you about how we can really, incorporate the needs of people with dyslexia into our big project. So, absolutely, we need to understand. We need to understand what works and what would really help people with these conditions be able to just feel a full part of these projects and as part of our churchyards and as part of our communities, because it's so important. So yes, I want to know more about it as well.
So Anderson, the invitation there, either if you're able to find Claire's name, directly contact her, or if you contact us at Caring for God's Acre, we will put you into contact with Claire. Perhaps just
thank you. Just to say, Liam's just popped the inquiries at CFGA email address in the chat. So anybody who wants to contact, do please use that.
And just perhaps the last of us are running up to 1 o'clock. There's a question there about where it's a closed churchyard, which means the local council is involved. They're quite strapped for cash, maintenance work done quickly and cheaply. Any responses from yourself, Jeanette, as to how we can help where it's a closed churchyard, the local council have responsibility there? What extra can we do?
Well, the local council has to comply with the Equality Act, just as everybody else does. So, and also cheap in the short term is not cheap in the long term. And so I think those are the things which have to go back to them about what needs to be done. And I think, again, if you go with a group of people with lived experience to highlight what is needed in these churchyards, I think that would be very helpful. I'm not sure how many local councils, again, have got disability officers with, who have the insight and knowledge to carry the breadth of what's needed for churchyards. So I think it's worth going along and discussing it with the appropriate team at the local council.
Just thank you so much. I mean, I think both Helen, do we all have to comply with building regs on wheelchair access routes? I mean, the nod there is from Claire, yes. Are you just nodding in agreement there, Claire?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, so there's slightly more flexibility with church buildings. If you're a historic building, you have to you have to comply as best you can, but there might be some flexibilities if for some reason the things that you want to do are going to cause some sort of awful damage to the heritage that's beyond you know, beyond what's considered acceptable. However, I say that with great restraint, because I think, you know, regardless of the heritage of the building and the space, you know, you need to comply with the Equality Act, and you need to comply with the building regs.
Claire, Jeanette, Helen, thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you to everybody who's listened in. And I'm sure you've got your own lived experience. You've got friends who are living with different forms of accessibility issues. And one of the clear messages you've heard is that the involvement of those people for whom it's their lived experience is one of the most sure ways of making our churchyards accessible to all. So thank you very much for your participation, and please do check in. You'll get the link for the webinar to listen to it again, share that with other people, and if there's any way that we can help you make your churchyard more accessible, please do contact us initially at inquiries at Caring for God's Acre. We'll put you in touch with the speakers if that's what you want. Thank you very much for your involvement this lunchtime. Have a great afternoon.